Guys, we're here for the second lecture for chapter 5. So in the last class, we talked about police management, administration, organization, how they're structured and set up, and we went over a bunch of terminology. So what we're going to do this week or this lecture is we're going to move on and we're going to talk about the idea of discretion and ethics that control what police officers do. Okay. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint and we're going to work our way through the different parts of this. Okay. So one of the things that we talked about is that police get to make a lot of choices with problem solving, and they have to review or assess their different options. That's because police officers are given a tremendous amount of ethics or choices. And that's one of the things that we also have to worry about with police because they have so many of those choices. So I just want you to think about what you would do or how you would handle these situations. What would you do if you saw your friend cheating on a test? Would you tell the teacher? Would you say anything to your friend? What would you do? What about stealing a shirt from a department store? Would you tell on them? Would you call public safety? Would you say anything to your friend? What if you knew there was a plan to vandalize the school? Would you say anything or do anything? Or what if you had a friend that was planning a violent attack on other students or a teacher? What would you do? The reason why I'm asking you these questions is because when you're a police officer, you have to make discretionary choices and you have to decide what you would do in different situations, especially when if it's somebody you personally know, and how are you going to handle that? So what do you think police would do when they see a crime? So if you're a police officer and you see a crime going to be committed or is being committed, even by somebody you know, what would you do in that situation? And what would a police officer do in that situation? Well, we know that police exercise discretion. So discretion is the ability to make a choice. So when you are in any sort of profession with the criminal justice system, you have a tremendous amount of discretion or ability to make choices on how you want to carry out your official duties. Now, in what situations do police exercise discretion? So think about an average day of a police officer. What kind of activities would they be doing every day to make that decision? Like, do they pull a car over or don't they? Do they give a ticket? Do they investigate something, or do they investigate another person? So all of those are what we would consider discretionary police choices. So then we want to think about what factors would affect these discretionary choices. What factors affect our how we make our discretionary choices. So I have this little chart here. So discriminatory decision making. So I want you to stop the video and I want you to take each of these things and I want you to classify them either as legitimate criteria for making discretionary choices or discriminatory criteria. So these are all things that could affect a police officer's use of discretion, but which things are okay to use with affecting our discretion and which ones would be illegitimate. So stop the video, try to map them out. And then when you're done, start the video and we'll see if you got them right. Okay, so these are how I broke it down. So how did you do? I'm sorry. Sometimes I think I talk so much in these, it makes me yawn. Okay, so legitimate criteria: seriousness of the crime, dangerousness of the offender, strength of the case. But there's other discriminatory things. These are things that should not necessarily affect our discretionary choices. So hopefully this is the way you broke them down. Okay, so let's use discretion. Terry lives in a group home of people who suffer from mental illness. After she stops taking her meds, a social worker stops by to check on Terry's well-being. She responds by threatening the social worker, yelling, "Get out of here, I have a knife and I'll kill you if I have to." The social worker contacts the police and you respond. The master key is used to open her her door and you see her holding a 5-inch kitchen knife, she screams, "I'm going to kill you. I don't need help." So if this is your situation, if you were in this discretionary decision, what would you do? How would you handle this situation? What are some of your options? What are some of the options that you have in this situation? Now, would you be justified in shooting her? Maybe, because she is carrying a knife and that's a deadly weapon. But are there other things, other options that you could take in this situation that would be less deadly? And that's one of the things police constantly have to assess. What is the appropriate thing to do for discretion? What would be the appropriate thing to do in this situation? And you may have lots and lots of choices, but what would be the best option, do you think? Okay. Now, one of the things we have are different styles of policing. So think about how your police enforce the laws where you live. And you can think about, are they really strict? Are they really hard on people? Do they work with the community? So there are different ways that departments decide to handle policing in their communities. And this is what we call the administrative styles. So it's the different ways that agencies choose to enforce the laws. Now, some of them give their officers lots and lots of discretion. Some of them don't give them very much discretion at all. They're very rigid on what the rules are and what they can do. It really varies from department to department, depending on the administration of that department. So the boss and what view they have on what the police should be doing to enforce the laws. So we're going to talk about the 3 different styles. So the first one is what we call the Watchmen style. So the Watchmen style gives police officers lots and lots and lots of discretion. The idea, though, generally is that their main goal is to stop illegal and disruptive behavior and to maintain order. So they're going to be public order advocates. A lot of times they may even be really harsh in their enforcement of the law. Since they believe enforcing the law is the number one thing, they may actually become rough and tough and stuff like that, mistreat people a little bit. Most of the time you see this style in lower income communities, and it also existed a lot during the political era. So these are where the police are going to be rough and tough and, maybe rough people up a little bit if they have to, because their sole goal is going to be enforcing the laws. And then we have the legalistic style. The legalistic style also is the opposite, basically. It provides no discretion at all, basically. If a police officer sees something wrong or a law, they have to arrest. They don't get options. They can't feel sympathy based on the facts of the situation. If there's a crime, there has to be an arrest. The departments take that discretion away and just mandate that their officers do different things. It just treats bothersome behavior a little bit less, and they don't really worry about solving problems in the community. They're really going to be just hardcore and stopping crime. So you're speeding at, if the speed limit is 55 and you're going 56, you're going to get pulled over and given a ticket. This really kicked in a lot during the reform era, because remember the previous one, the Watchmen, was really during the political era, which was really politically corrupt. So then they were trying to reform it in the reform era. And the idea was, if we just mandate what police have to do and take away some of their discretion, then we'll have less corruption. We're giving them less discretion to engage in corrupt activities. Okay. So the last one is what we call service style. So service style is much more of like a community policing types of thing. They get lots of discretion, and their sole goal or style is to problem solve, to work closely with the community and come up with different ways to stop crime in the community. A lot of community resources that they integrate with the community resources. They see themselves as helpers, not warriors. Police see themselves as warriors much more in the Watchmen style. This is much more of a helper style, working with the community. And this is what you see in a lot of communities now in today's day. So a lot of local communities, they use service style. And pretty much all the police around Batavia use some sort of service or community style policing. You still see some of the other ones in the big cities, more common, but most of the more rural communities, you're going to see much more service style policing. Okay, so learning check, name the style of policing. So there's 3 examples. I want you to read each of them and to decide which style they would be. So here's the first one. So read it, stop the video, read it, and pick out which style of policing you think it is. And then you can go to the next one. Okay, here's the next one. So what style of policing do you think it is? And do you agree with it? So read it, think about what you want, and then start the video again. And then here's the third one. What style? Do you agree with it? So make sure you have all 3 done. And when you're all done, stop the video, make sure you're all done. And when you're done, you can start it again. And I wrote down what I think they are. Okay, so I thought the first one was legalistic. The second one is Watchmen. And the third one is service style. Okay, so let's do the reverse now. Let's go the other way. So a police department provides security and crowd control at a peace and justice march just outside the state penitentiary before an execution. So if you are the police administration, you're the boss, what kind of style would you think would work best in this situation and why? And then what about this one? A group of rowdy teenagers dressed in black with multiple piercings are bothering evening shoppers at a local shopping plaza. If you were a police department, what style do you think would work best? So there's not really a right or wrong answer. It's just based on the philosophy of the administration for the police. So maybe the first one, you're more legalistic. If there's anybody that steps out of line, you're just going to arrest them to keep it from escalating. Maybe the next one, you would do more community service, like finding other things for them to do at night so they don't bother shoppers. So you problem solve. So it's up to the administration to decide which one that they think is better. And then they would direct their officers along the style that they've chosen. So now think about your own local police department. What style, how would you describe your own local police department? Do you think they're more legalistic or more watchmen or more community service types of policing? Just curious what you think. Okay, so we're giving all this power and all this discretion to police officers. And that is a lot of, power. They can make a lot of decisions. So we want to make sure that they are making decisions using proper discretion. So how do we assure that police are not abusing their discretion? Well, we have to use lots of things. Number one, we have to be very careful who we're recruiting and hiring within these positions. So police officers often have to go through extensive psychological testing and counseling and things like that, because we want officers that have desirable personality traits that are going to properly use the discretion that they're given and not violate ethics. The next thing is we want to continue with education and training. So through the police academy and then continuous education throughout your career, they're going to teach professionalism and proper use of discretion. And they're going to talk about and reinforce the ethics that you need to follow in order to properly use discretion. So I just really like this. I think this is fun to think about how you use discretion. So these are the things to ask yourself when you have to make a discretionary choice to make sure that you're making an ethical decision. Ask yourself, is it legal? Is it fair? How would my family and friends feel about my decision to act this way? What would they think about it? How does it make me feel about myself? Would I be proud of myself with this decision? And would I do it in front of my grandma or my mom? Okay. So I just think those are good ways when you're faced with an ethical decision and you want to make sure you're following proper ethics. Ask yourself some of these basic questions to make sure you're following what you would think would be proper ethics. So, what do you think? Do you think most police or law enforcement officers do conduct themselves in ethical manner? Why or why not? So I just have a couple pictures here. This one was a protest. They were just sitting there protesting, and these officers came by and were using like this massive powered pepper spray to spray them all directly in the face. And so that was one. And then there's this guy, and he comes to the same neighborhood after every shift. He brings snacks and sodas, and he hangs out with the kids for at least an hour. Sometimes he plays games with them. In the summer when it's hot, he brought a slip inside and water guns. He brings coats and hoodies in the winter. So which do you think is more common? What do you think? And it may vary where you live. A lot of times, if you live in more of a community policing type of thing, you may have a better rapport with the police, and you may think police do ethically use their discretion. If you live in a big city where the police are constantly harassing people and coming down on them in a legalistic or a Watchmen style, you may believe that they're not being ethical sometimes. So there's not one right or wrong answer to this. It may depend on your personal experience of what you've had with police throughout your lifetime. So when we talk about ethics, with discretion and the use of ethics, we also have to talk about the concept of corruption. So what is corruption? Corruption is using your discretion in an unlawful or unethical way. Okay. So when you're talking about corruption, you can look at two different types of corruption. So one type is what we call grass eating. Grass eating would be minor, not serious forms of corruption, like taking a free cup of coffee or letting your mom off on a ticket. Meat eating is severe, really bad forms of corruption. So planting evidence, abusing suspects, things like that. That would be what we call meat eating corruption, or the worst types of corruption. So what do you think each of these would be? Okay, so read through them and decide meat eating or grass eating. Oops, sorry. So fill them out, stop the video, try to identify each of them. When you're done, start the video, and I'll give you what I think the answers are. Okay, so this is how I would classify: off-duty speeding, grass eating, bribing a judge, meat eating, free cup of coffee, grass eating, tampering with evidence, meat eating, not giving a friend a ticket, grass eating, reselling drugs from a crime scene, meat eating. Okay, so hopefully you see the distinction between them very clearly. So then we have to ask ourselves, so we have all this discretion for police, and we hope that they followed ethics, but some of them don't. Some of them choose to be corrupt. So we need to study this and figure out what are the factors that make them become corrupt. Because maybe if we can figure out why, we can stop that from occurring in the first place. So they have done some different studies on police corruption. And some of the major causes of police corruption are feeling disrespected by the community not appreciating the hard work you do, working hard to convict somebody of a crime, and then having their prosecution go wrong so that they're back on the street again doing the same thing. The low pay, they don't always make as much money as other professions. So there could be family pressure for money. So there's lots of different reasons why a police officer could ultimately become corrupt. We also have this thing within police that's called the blue code of silence, or the blue curtain. I don't know if you've ever heard this before. There's a strong subculture within police that believes they're in it together. All the police are in it together. So even if a police officer does something corrupt or does something illegal even or wrong, they will never report that person to the boss. They will never turn somebody else in for anything. They're going to stick together. The problem with this is it just encourages corruption to continue because there's no accountability for their actions. So it's a really difficult thing that police officers often have to deal with, that inability to ever address a situation that a police officer thinks is corrupt because they would violate this blue code of silence. It's a pretty strict cultural thing within police. If you violate the blue code of silence, the other officers will turn against you. And a lot of times they won't come to your aid if you need help with something. So the blue code of silence is a very serious thing within police departments. So what do you think? The user agreement for both Facebook and Instagram ban law enforcement agents from going undercover online by impersonating others or setting up false accounts. This has not stopped police from engaging in this practice. Is it ethical? Why or why not? So Facebook and Instagram have specifically created policies. You're not allowed to create fake accounts and impersonate somebody else. But police do it all the time, especially for sex stings, to try to catch pedophiles and things like that are taking advantage of youth on these sites. So what do you think about police blatantly violating a company's policy? Is it okay because the ends justify the means? We're doing it for good, valid reasons because we want to stop these really bad people? Or should they not be doing this? Should they not be blatantly violating these policies? So it's just a decision. It's just a thought. It's not really, there's definitely arguments on both sides. Okay. So there is this one thing, because like of that example I just gave you, it's called noble cause corruption. It's the idea that, okay, we may be violating rules, but we're doing it for a good purpose in the end. So that is a form of corruption, though. If you agree that it's okay to violate rules or violate people's constitutional rights, because it's going to be a bit greater benefit at the end, you'll catch the bad person. We're going to look the other way for the bad things you do because we catch the bad person and put them in jail. That's what we call noble cause corruption. We justify to ourselves that it's okay to engage in some unethical or corrupt behavior because the ends justify the means. We're happy with the end results, okay? But the problem with that is it can lead to what we call slippery slope theory. So this is a chart of all the different levels of corruption. So at the bottom are low level grass eating corruption. And then it goes up to the more severe meat eating forms of corruption. And the idea is if you allow some of these lower ones, even for noble cause corruption claims, it eventually leads more and more people to commit higher and higher levels of corruption. If there's no accountability at the lower level, then we're going to have people move more and more up the slope of committing more unethical acts. And that's what we call slippery slope theory. So we don't want any corruption, any bad discretionary unethical decisions, because it's just going to lead to more serious consequences. So I just have a little scenario. So I want you to read about Oliva and see what advice you would give in this situation. What do you think should happen in this situation? So stop the video, read it through, and give it some thought. What do you think? So one of the things that they talk about in this situation is testifying. That is a noble cause corruption. You think that it's okay to lie on a stand under oath in order to convict somebody that you think is guilty of a crime. So think about it. Do you ever think that that's okay as a police officer, even if it means the guilty person gets, has to take it or gets convicted or may not get convicted? So you really have to think about it. Testifying is a major thing that police officers have to face. Okay, so there's a whole law enforcement code of ethics. what you need to do is you need to print out that law enforcement code of ethics in my courses, and you need to have it with you. You need to use that to complete the ethical problems for this week's assignment. You need to specifically reference what ethics guide you in making your decisions on what you would do in the various situations. Okay, so that's the end of the second lecture. There will be one more lecture that we're going to cover this week, and then we'll be done, and we'll move on to finish up policing next week with chapter 6. So I hope you have a great night, and I will be back with the last video.